The days that followed were distorted and terrifying for Mandy. She was delirious most of the time, her fever dangerously high. Whenever she opened her eyes, she discovered she couldn't focus on anything. There was a vibrating sensation in her body, a constant buzzing in her head. She was conscious of voices from time to time. She recognized Dr. Matthews, and she thought she heard Matron Bridie's, but she couldn't place the other voices. At times she felt a soft, cool hand on her brow, and saw a woman's face, sweet and concerned. And often an arm was about her shoulders and a cup of liquid held to her lips. When she drank to ease her parched throat, the cup in front of her often seemed as small as a thimble, and her lips would feel so thick and swollen it was impossible to encompass it. Then again the cup would appear as large as a bowl. She was incredibly weak and couldn't move without someone helping her. The effort of breathing required all her strength. As she fought for air, she heard the sounds that her breathing made and felt a painful thickness in her chest. Once she vaguely heard Dr. Matthews' voice. "She mustn't be moved. She should stay here." And there was the sharp prick of a needle, and always the burning skin and limbs aching from fever. But gradually the pain lessened and her temperature subsided. Sleep claimed her for long, restoring periods. If she did wake, then the woman was miraculously there to soothe and comfort her. Finally the day came when the world was no longer out of focus. Mandy opened her eyes and saw a soft pink room and watery sunlight shining gently through transparent curtains at a high window. She slowly turned her head and saw a chair, a fireplace, a table in one corner of the room with bottles and glasses and a thermometer on it. A pretty coverlet was on her bed. She looked up and noticed every detail of the ceiling, molded plaster flowers and garlands standing out in sharp, clear relief. She stirred, and immediately there was a movement beside her. The lady with the sweet face had been sitting in a chair near the bed. Now she came to her and smiled. "Hello, Mandy. It's good to see you awake at last." The gentle voice was warm and friendly. "How are you feeling?" "A bit thirsty, please." Mandy spoke shyly. "Well, that's easily remedied. Here." She filled a glass with water and helped Mandy sit up to drink it. "I've been wondering when you would finally open your eyes. You know, this is the first time you've been really awake in 3 whole days." Oh! Mandy wondered where she was, and why wasn't she at the orphanage? "You've been a very sick little girl." "Yes." She lay back against the pillow. Everything seemed too bright. The light from the window made her head ache. She couldn't understand why the room, and even the woman, her face, dress, the ring on her finger, stood out in such detail. Mandy closed her eyes again. Better to shut it all out. She heard a door open quietly. The lady spoke softly. "Oh, Bill, she just came to and seemed quite lucid." "Good." Mandy heard someone move toward the bed, and she felt a hand on her brow. "Fever's gone down too, I should say." Mandy would like to have seen who it was who spoke, but somehow the thought of facing the world so soon was too much. She turned away and let herself slip down into sleep again. Much later, Mandy awoke to find Dr. Matthews standing beside her. "Well, it's about time you woke up, young lady. How are you feeling?" "Much better." "You look better. You've been quite a sorry sight these past few days." "What happened?" "Oh, what didn't happen?" Dr. Matthews sat down beside her on the bed and took her hand. "Do you remember anything at all?" She shook her head. "Well, you were found in a cottage in the woods. Mr. Fitzgerald brought you back to his house. You've had a nasty bout with pneumonia." "Oh." Where's Matron? She'll be by tomorrow. Is she angry with me? No. She's worried about you, though. You gave her a bad time. Oh, dear. Mandy's fingers clutched anxiously at the coverlet. But it's over and done with now. The doctor's voice was firm. I want you to concentrate on getting well. Could you eat something? Mandy was surprised to discover that she was hungry. Dr. Matthews went off to arrange for some food for her, and she lay back in her bed looking at the pretty room. Compared with her room at the orphanage, this room was very large. She wondered if the rest of the house was big, too. What did it look like? Was there a garden? There was the sound of footsteps coming towards her room, and the doctor came in again. Mandy recognized the woman with him. She carried a tray of food. Mandy, this is Anne Fitzgerald. This good woman has been with you night and day. Hello, Mandy. Anne helped Mandy to sit up, and she arranged the pillows behind her back. There. How does that look to you? She placed the tray on Mandy's knees. Fine, thank you. But she was suddenly too weak to pick up the spoon for the broth, and she lay back listlessly. Let me help. Anne took the bowl and gently fed Mandy spoonfuls of the warm liquid. Dr. Matthews sat close by and kept up a stream of cheery conversation, watching her closely all the while. May I say hello, too? A tall man entered the room and crossed quietly to the bedside. Mandy recognized the voice. Mandy, this is my husband, Bill, Anne said. Mandy looked up and knew this was the knight she had seen on horseback in the rain. This was the man who had brought her here. Thank you for all you've done. You've been very kind. Oh, my dear, it's been a pleasure. He had a nice smile and laughing grey eyes. Are you feeling better? Mandy nodded. For some reason she felt a little tearful. Why were they all being so good to her? She blinked and looked away. Everyone started to speak at once. Dr. Matthews got up and announced that it was time for her to rest again. Wait! Mandy found her voice. Could you please just tell me what happened? I mean, how it happened and why I'm here? Well, Bill looked quickly across to Dr. Matthews as if seeking permission to speak. As far as I can gather, Matron discovered you were missing. Then she called Sue. Is that your friend? Sue told her that you might be at the cottage, which is on my property. So Matron called me, and I went to find you and brought you home. He smiled. Mandy nodded. It was Sue who had really saved her. She alone knew that Mandy might have gone to the cottage. How fortunate it was, after all, that Sue had followed her and discovered the cottage. But for that, Mandy might never have been found. It was a chilling thought. Dr. Matthews spoke up. Now, young lady, you've got a lot of convalescing to do. That's enough excitement for one night. Bill and Anne said good night, and presently the good doctor departed. Mandy drifted into sleep, and wasn't sure if it were minutes or hours later that she felt the familiar, cool hand on her brow. The woman's soft voice whispered, Good night, Mandy. Sleep well. I'll be here if you need me. The days passed, and Mandy improved rapidly, but she still had a cough that threatened to tear her insides apart. It wasn't long before she was able to feed herself and take notice of much that was going on around her. She met Mary, the middle-aged cleaning woman, who came every day except Sundays to help Anne with the house, and she also met Sally, the cook. One cold, clear morning, there was a knock on her bedroom door. An old, thin man entered, his arms full of wood. "Good morning, miss. Is it all right if I light the fire for you?" "Oh, yes." Mandy watched him as he laboriously applied the small sticks and logs to the already crumpled newspaper in the grate. "What's your name?" "I'm called Samson, miss. I'm the butler." Mandy laughed aloud for the first time since her illness. Such a ludicrous name for such a dear old man. She liked him instantly. She became enormously fond of Anne, too, and was anxious when she wasn't close by. Bill came to visit her often, and she listened for and learned to distinguish their footsteps about the house. She was aware of the house itself now. Voices echoed up from the downstairs rooms, suggesting high ceilings. When a door banged, it had a hollow, heavy sound, and Mandy counted the many steps it took for someone to climb the stairs. The house was quite large. A beautiful garden was immediately beneath her room, consisting mostly of low, boxed hedge areas containing several hundred rose trees. Beyond the formal planting was a large green lawn leading to a wide stream which separated the lawn from several acres of pasture land. Beyond the fields were miles of woodland stretching as far as Mandy could see. Mandy's bedroom was obviously in the center portion of the house. From where she sat in bed, she could see two wings of the building, one extending to her left and the other to her right. Though much larger and grander, it looked a little like the orphanage. The windows were similarly proportioned, and the house was built of the same indigenous stone. Mandy spoke to Anne about it one day. "How long have you lived here, Anne?" "Not long at all. We moved in late this summer." "Where did you live before that?" "Oh, a long way away. But you know, hundreds of years ago, Bill's ancestors built this place. Unfortunately, the house was destroyed by a huge fire, and the family lost all its money and had to sell the estate. It's been Bill's dream to buy it back. All his life he's wanted to live here. Just this year it became possible." "How marvelous!" Mandy was enthralled. "Yes, it is, isn't it? I just hope and pray we can afford to keep it all going. The forestry and farming can be very productive one day, but it's a terrible expense at the moment." Anne looked out across the park. "It means such a lot to us both, and it's such a beautiful place." She changed the subject. "You know, it's so cold out there today, it's just possible we'll have some snow. Before Christmas, too." "What date is it?" Mandy had no idea. "December the 10th. Jonathan will be home from school soon." "Jonathan?" "Our son. You'll like him a lot, Mandy. He's 14 years old and very handsome." Anne smiled in a teasing way. Mandy was taken aback. She hadn't realized that Bill and Anne had a child. She hadn't given it a thought, in fact. She'd been so content with the spoiling and the love she had received from these two people. Now the thought of sharing it with someone else, someone much closer to them than she was disturbing. She wondered what Jonathan was really like, and if he would like her. She had the vague feeling that she wouldn't like him at all. As Mandy's health improved, she received a stream of visitors. Dr. Matthews came to see her daily, of course, and Matron Bridie visited as often as her busy schedule permitted. Mandy was always a little anxious when she came. She was afraid that Matron would suggest it was time for her to return to the orphanage. But Matron made no mention of it. She didn't mention the cottage, or Mandy's behavior the day of the storm either. Far from being angry, she showed nothing but concern. Alice and Ellie visited one day. Alice had baked a cake for her as a surprise. Ellie brought messages and letters from some of the children. Mandy was touched that they thought of her, but this, too, made her anxious. Any reminder of the orphanage was unpleasant at the moment. Sue was the most important visitor. She arrived one cold, cloudy afternoon, holding a small bunch of brightly colored anemones which she shyly handed to Mandy. "Hello, Mandy. Are you feeling better?" "Yes, thank you." "Jake sent these flowers to you. They come from Mr. Simple's shop. He thought they would cheer you up and look nice in your room." Sue looked around. "It's a lovely room, isn't it? And a super house. I haven't really seen it yet. Oh, it's huge, Mandy. It takes ages to get up here. You come along this long drive. What are the owners like? Sue was asking questions again. Mandy wished she wouldn't. Oh, they're very kind. She tried not to make her voice too abrupt. I met the lady. She seems nice. There was a pause. Sue looked down at the floor and then said, almost fiercely, You are lucky. Mandy was startled. Why? Oh, I don't know. Everything seems to happen to you. You're always the one who goes and does something. I never seem to have any good ideas like you do. You know, you found the cottage, and now all of this. She indicated the house and the beautiful garden. It was a sad gesture, a little hopeless. Mandy's heart softened. She wished she could explain to Sue how often it was that she felt lost and lonely. She opened her mouth to speak, but Sue interrupted. Mandy, I hope you didn't mind my telling Matron about the cottage. Oh, Sue. Mandy spoke with all the sincerity she felt. I'm so glad you did. Yes, but I know you wanted it kept a secret. If you hadn't told about it, I might never have been found, might I? No. Gosh. Sue looked at Mandy, her face solemn, her eyes filling with tears. So you see, it's really you who saved me, and I have to thank you. Mandy felt tearful, too, and suddenly the girls were embracing each other and crying and laughing at the same time. Sue sniffed and blew her nose, and Mandy coughed her hollow cough, and it sounded so terrible that both girls burst out laughing again. They had tea and some of Alice's cake, and spent a pleasant afternoon together. When it was time to go, Sue paused at the doorway. Can I come to see you again? Yes. When are you coming back? I don't know. It's awfully quiet there without you. The attic seems ever so empty. I expect it will be soon. Mandy spoke the words bravely, trying to be cheerful for Sue's sake, but she wished with all her heart that she need never think about going back to the orphanage again. Mandy, I want you to meet Jonathan. Anne spoke happily as she came into the bedroom. Jonathan, this is Mandy. Mandy put aside the book she had been reading. Her heart beat a little faster. How do you do, Jonathan? Hi. His voice cracked with enthusiasm and ended up somewhere in his boots. Jonathan cleared his throat and took her extended hand in his somewhat moist one. Mandy had the impression of a tall, gangling boy, his dark hair falling loosely across his forehead, with ruddy cheeks and his mother's very clear blue eyes. He was dressed in his school uniform. His mother said, I'm sure you want to change, darling, but will you have some lemonade or something first? I'd love it. He moved to the window and looked eagerly out across the park, his hands thrust deep in his pockets. Oh, Mum, this is super! He whirled on Mandy. Don't you like it? Mandy had a hard time finding her voice. Never had she met anyone who exuded so much energy. He dominated the entire room. If only he weren't so tall. Yes, I mean, what I've seen of it I like, she stammered, and wished she could appear calm and not so shy. Perhaps later on, when Mandy's able to get up, you'll show her around the house, John. She might enjoy it. Anne watched both children closely. Yes, all right. He stood nonchalantly looking at her. A couldn't-care-less attitude. When would you like to do that? He asked. Oh, It won't be possible for a day or two, John, Anne spoke quickly. Maybe tomorrow at the earliest. Okay. A pause. Then, well, see you later. A remote, casual wave, and he was gone, although Mandy felt his presence still lingering in the room. Anne smiled, a secret sort of smile. She winked at Mandy and said, I'll be back soon, darling. Then she hurried out after the boy. Mandy was left with a distinctly stunned feeling. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but this boy, this mixture of grace and awkwardness, self-contained yet so full of life, was certainly not what she had anticipated at all. For the rest of the day she lay in bed, listening to every footstep that passed her door, and praying that Jonathan wouldn't come back into her room. He didn't. But she could hear him about the house. The place seemed to come alive now that he was home. She could hear Bill laughing in a downstairs room, and the boy explaining something in detail and laughing about it too. He was probably telling about some escapade at school. At dinner time, she heard the bright chatter and the clink of silver and plates coming from the dining room. It made her feel lonely and sad and left out. Later, when Anne came to sit with her for a while, she lay listlessly against the pillows, quieter than usual. Anne curled up in a chair by the fire and tucked her legs underneath her. "It's fun having Jonathan home." "Yes." Mandy hesitated, then bravely lied. "He seems very nice." "Well, you hardly got a chance to say hello to him at all." Anne smiled at Mandy, then leaned on the arm of the chair and said in a quieter voice, "He's rather bouncy, though, isn't he?" "Oh, well, I think if I were your age I'd be rather overwhelmed by him." Mandy was surprised. Anne had touched on the very thing that she was feeling. "It's just that, well, I got sort of frightened. I don't know why." She laughed nervously. "Oh, I do, Mandy. You've been waiting to see our son, whom you know I adore, and you must wonder if he'll like you. Then in he comes, full of energy. You feel you should try to like him because he belongs here. It must be very intimidating, especially after your illness. He must make you feel you could never keep up with him." Mandy thought about it, digesting what Anne had just said. It was indeed the way she felt. "Just remember one thing, Mandy." Anne looked at her fondly. "He's probably just as worried about you." "Oh?" Mandy was astonished. "Why, yes, he's wondering if you like him and how he fits in here with you around, particularly since he's been away at school." She leaned forward and stirred the dying embers of the fire with a poker. "It'll take time for you to learn to like each other. You mustn't worry if it doesn't happen. You may find you'd rather keep to yourself until you go back to the orphanage. It's not going to upset Bill or me." Then she changed the subject. "I was wondering if you'd like to get up for a little while tomorrow. I thought maybe we could celebrate your getting better, and John's being home too, and all have dinner together downstairs tomorrow evening. We could really bundle you up warmly, and Samson could light a big fire in the lounge, just for an hour or so." Though Mandy would rather have stayed in bed in her comfortable, safe room, she felt she couldn't hurt Anne by refusing the invitation. So she said politely, "Yes, thank you, that would be very nice." The evening was a smashing success. Bill came to take her downstairs. He made a tremendous fuss, taking her arm and leading her down the big staircase with so much ceremony that Mandy felt as though she were being escorted to a very special party. The main hall was tremendous, 3 flights of wide, shallow stairs on 3 sides of a stairwell. The banister beneath her hand was solid and smooth, the wood polished to a high gloss. On the 4th side of the stairwell, a tremendous tapestry was hanging. Portraits lined the other walls, each one separately lit from above and glowing in the evening dusk. A thick carpet lay beneath Mandy's slippered feet. At the bottom of the stairs, Anne and Samson were waiting for her. She smiled nervously and clung to Bill's hand. Samson pushed open 2 huge doors, and the small party moved into the lounge. It was a beautiful room, long and narrow. A big fire was burning in the grate. There were comfortable furnishings with deep, soft cushions and fresh flowers in vases about the room. Jonathan sprang up out of a chair as they entered. "Well, John," Bill said, "we can go into dinner now. Hungry, Amanda?" Mandy smiled at Bill's correct use of her name. Maybe just a tiny bit. Well, I'm starving. Jonathan led the way to another series of double doors and opened them wide. They opened onto a small dining room. There was a table set for 4 people. Dishes were steaming over hot plates on a long sideboard. Beyond the table were more double doors and a smaller door set into the left wall. Jonathan explained. That door leads to the hall again, Mandy, and look here. He pushed open the second set of double doors and stood back. Mandy gasped. She was looking into a vast, long room, obviously a larger, formal dining room. Marble pillars at either end rose to the exquisite plaster ceiling above. A huge refectory table in the center ran almost to the far wall, and the room had the same beautiful windows as the lounge. "You know your way around already, John," Anne said as they seated themselves for dinner. Jonathan grinned. "Yep. I found a secret passageway, too." "Oh, where?" asked Bill. "Between the 2nd and 3rd floors." "Oh, that one. You mean there's another one?" I'm not going to tell you." "Oh, Dad, where?" "Wait and see." The boy squirmed and howled in protest as his father teased him. Anne laughed and Mandy joined in. She couldn't help it. Bill looked wickedly at them all, his eyes gleaming with merriment. "I'll tell you tomorrow, John, then you can show Mandy." "Oh, please tell us now." Mandy spoke up. She, too, was anxious to know where a secret passageway might be. "In the back of the cupboard in our bedroom, there's a door that gives access to a passageway. It leads to another cupboard in the big guest bedroom. Long ago, the lord of the manor could visit his lady without having anybody know about it. Clever, wasn't it? Bill, I don't think even you know where all the nooks and crannies are in this house." Anne smiled across at him. "I don't." Dinner was a joyous affair. Anne looked lovingly at the group around the table. "It's really grand being together like this," she said. "Here's a toast to Mandy." Bill suddenly lifted his glass. Jonathan and Anne paused to do the same. "We're glad that you're better and delighted to have you with us this evening." "Oh, thank you." Mandy's face was rosy with happiness. After dinner, Anne led the way to the library. "Here, Mandy, you want to see another secret of this house? Look at this." She pressed a button in the molding on the wall, and the entire panel slid back to reveal a small pipe organ nestling in an alcove. It was of the same wood as the library paneling, but painted with gold leaf embellishments. 2 pretty candle brackets were attached to the music stand. A small bench covered in soft rose-colored silk straddled the pedals on the floor. "How beautiful," Mandy breathed. "This was put in the house by one of Bill's eccentric ancestors." Anne smiled across at him. "Bless the old gentleman." "Play it, Mother," Jonathan begged. "Oh, please." Mandy couldn't wait to hear it. "Well, some of the stops are missing, but it does still function. We'll have it restored properly one day." Anne slid onto the stool and pulled at the knobs and touched some buttons. She let her hands run over the keys. Warm, golden sounds poured forth with the wonderful, breathless quality that's so characteristic of a pipe organ. "Here, John, you know this one." Anne began to sing and play an old English melody. Jonathan and Bill joined in, their voices blending with hers. Mandy listened with delight. It was a lusty country song, and it ended with them all collapsing in laughter. "Do you know any songs, Mandy?" Anne asked. "Only hymns, mostly." "Let's sing some carols," Jonathan suggested. "That's right, it's nearly Christmas," Bill agreed. Anne played "Good King Wenceslas" and "In the Bleak Midwinter" and "We Three Kings." Everyone sang loudly, and Mandy found herself joining in. She thought that she had never been so happy in her life. But she knew she would have to return to the orphanage soon, and that this happiness would end. Anne noticed the little girl's forlorn expression. "That's enough for tonight," she said. "I think it's time for one young lady to get back into bed." Bill swept Mandy up into his arms. "Are you tired, Mandy?" "No," she giggled. "Tell you what," said Anne, You go and get into bed, Mandy, and I'll bring you up some hot lemon and honey. How would you like that? Lovely, thank you. Can I have some, Mother? Jonathan wanted to know. Yes, you great lump. You can have some too. And so it was. Mandy climbed into her warm, comfortable bed. Bill and Anne sat by as she and Jonathan drank the steaming liquid from big china mugs. Later, when they had all gone and she was left alone in the darkness, she relived every moment of the wonderful evening. She would remember it all her life. It snowed the following day. Great white flakes drifted down, creating a new world outside the big house. Inside the house it was warm and cozy. Anne was triumphant. I told you it would snow soon. We're going to have a white Christmas. She insisted that Samson light big fires in all the main rooms. By mid-afternoon, the countryside was covered with 2 to 3 inches of virgin snow. Every tree was traced in white, and the branches of the fir trees bowed down with the weight. Jonathan was out all morning, bundled up and ruddy-faced. He and Brendan, the groom, made a huge snowman in the stable yard. At lunchtime, John bounced into the house, trailing snow behind him and leaving wet footprints in the main hallway. His mother reprimanded him in no uncertain terms. Mandy slept late and remained in her room until after lunch. Then she too dressed warmly and was allowed downstairs. Jonathan approached her. He seemed in unusually good spirits. Mother says maybe you'd like to see the rest of the house. Mandy's heart jumped. Did he really want to show her, or had Anne insisted? Jonathan led her off down a corridor. He took her into a big, unused kitchen that in olden times had been the busiest place in the house. It had a huge fireplace and an iron pulley over it that must have held the sides of beef and pork for roasting. There were great black ovens and marble counters and wooden chopping blocks, and there was a big skylight overhead. Jonathan's voice echoed through the room. Dad says this'll be the first room he'll restore when he can. Where's the kitchen that you use now? Mandy felt lost and small. In the pantry. Well, it used to be the pantry. Come on, I'll show you the rest. The boy went tearing off down the hall. Mandy breathlessly tried to keep up with him. She was too shy to ask him to slow down a little. Jonathan showed her the secret passageway he had discovered between the 2nd and 3rd floors. It had a small spiral staircase, no more than 1.5 feet wide, and it was very dark. Jonathan plunged ahead, leaving Mandy to find her own way. Suddenly, in the darkness, she became very scared. Jonathan! She heard him running back to the foot of the stairs. What is it? Help me, please. I'm frightened. She began to cry and stood where she was until she heard him in the darkness climbing back up to her. She felt his strong hand grasp hers. It's all right, Mandy. Just one more corner and there's light on the stairs. Come on now. Gently, he led her safely down, and she stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. Jonathan saw her white face and felt compassion for her. Are you all right? He asked anxiously. Yes, thank you. She bravely tried to stop crying. Jonathan looked at Mandy as if seeing her for the first time. To his surprise, he became aware that she was a person with feelings. Until now, she had seemed to him to be just a silly girl who happened to be visiting for a while. Here, Mandy, I know what you'd like. Come and see something. He took her downstairs, this time staying close by her side. Mandy was beginning to feel really tired, but she went along. He took her to the doorway leading to the stable yard. Look. Jonathan pointed outside, and she saw the snowman he had built. It was a ridiculous snowman, straw hair sticking out under a riding hat with a whip in his hand. Already he was half covered with fresh snow. Mandy began to laugh. He looks huffy, sort of angry. Well, so would you be if you had to stand out there in the cold all the time. Jonathan smiled. Anne came down the passageway. She called anxiously, "Mandy, come away from the door. It's much too draughty there." Her voice was sharp. "Really, John, you ought to know better." Mandy was exhausted. Anne noticed the circles under her eyes and suggested she rest for a while. Mandy went upstairs. When Anne looked into her room seconds later, she had already fallen into a deep sleep. When she awoke a couple of hours later, it was dusk. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house. Anne speaking quietly to Samson. Bill's footsteps going to his study. A door closing. Music coming faintly from the radio in the kitchen. Mandy wished she were truly a part of it all. She got up slowly and wandered to the window. The familiar, aching sadness suddenly gripped her as she gazed out at the silent world. It would be cold in the cottage. The garden would be white and desolate. No one to take care of it now. How long would it be before she was returned to the orphanage? Would she go to the cottage? It held so many unpleasant memories. But there had been pleasant ones too. She remembered the lovely summer and the thrill of growing her beautiful flowers and the peaceful, quiet days that were all her own. Yet now, as she looked back on them, they seemed to have been lonely days too. Mandy supposed it was some sort of comparison with being in Cranton House. The warmth and comfort she had received from Bill and Anne was like nothing she had ever known before. She was going to miss them desperately. Mandy turned away from the window. There was a light tap on the door. "Mandy, are you awake?" It was Bill. He came into the room and quietly switched on her bedside light. Anne wondered if he wanted supper downstairs or on a tray up here. He noticed her sad and tear-stained face. He sat down on the bed beside her and put a hand on her brow. Mandy spoke quickly. "Oh, Bill, I think I'd rather stay up here. Do you mind?" She brushed her eyes. "Fine, I'll tell Anne." But he made no move to go. Presently he said, "What have you been thinking about?" "I was thinking about the orphanage and the shell cottage and the garden and everything." "You did a marvelous job on the little garden, Mandy." "Did you see it?" She was surprised. "I certainly did," Bill smiled. "Didn't you get my notes?" "Why," Mandy's eyes opened wide. "You mean it was you who left?" "Yes, Mandy, I'm afraid I'm the culprit. I left you the messages. I left the chrysanthemum plant, too. Did you get that? Oh, and I had to clear the garden." "And mend the gate," Mandy whispered. "I've been meaning to tell you, Manders, but I wanted to wait till you were better." "But how did you... when did you see me?" "I was riding around the estate when we first moved in. I saw you working in the garden. I knew you must be from the orphanage, so I didn't disturb you. You seemed to be so occupied with it all. It would have spoiled your fun. I got the idea of leaving you a note from time to time. I had a thought that you might like the mystery of it." It was a silly game, really. I realized that almost immediately. I was going to come to visit you and explain the next time I was near the cottage, but you beat me to it. You got sick and came to visit me instead." Mandy shook her head in bewilderment. There was no such person as the handsome prince she had imagined. An admirer was just this kind, big, somewhat frightening man, and he had sought to amuse her with a game. "But what made you clear up the garden? Why did you do it?" "Mandy, I had to. There are other cottages on the estate. I needed to see what I had, so I sent a tractor in to clear everything. Of course, I paid a bit more attention to the shell cottage." Mandy felt an emotion rising within her which she couldn't understand. She turned her head away from the light and looked toward the window. The white flakes were still falling through the black night, brushing gently on the glass. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "What is it, Mandy?" Bill took her hand. "Can you tell me?" He waited. "Won't you try to tell me?" There was a long pause as she silently fought to gain control. Then, in a small, lost voice, she whispered one word. "Snow." Mandy had a fever the following morning. Her temperature went soaring up. Dr. Matthews hurried over to Cranton House earlier than usual. He teased Mandy gently. "Now, my dear young lady, don't tell me you're getting sick again. We can't have that." After a careful examination, he announced, "Nothing too serious. We'll just have to retrace our steps a little, that's all. I'm afraid it's back to bed with you for a while, Mandy. You've just been coming along a little too fast. Recovering from these illnesses takes time." He patted her hand. "I'll come by this evening." Jonathan visited her in the late afternoon. Seeing Mandy's wan face and knowing that she was ill again seemed to scare him a little. He didn't stay long. When Dr. Matthews returned in the evening, he brought Matron Bridie with him. Matron requested that she be left alone with Mandy. Mandy sank down into the warmth of the bed covers and wished she didn't have to hear anything at all. She stared fixedly ahead as Matron drew up a chair and sat beside her. "Mandy, I have an invitation for you from the Fitzgeralds. They'd very much like to have you spend Christmas here with them at Cranton House. Do you think you might like to do that?" Mandy couldn't believe her ears. She was so thrilled that for a moment she couldn't think of anything to say. Matron smiled. Well, I see that you would like it very much indeed. In that case, I'll tell Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald that you may stay, and that I shall collect you the day after Christmas, say around noon. How does that sound to you?" Mandy found her voice. She spoke with emotion. "Oh, Matron, thank you so much. Oh, golly, it's going to be such an exciting Christmas." The days sped by quickly. Mandy stayed in bed most of the time, but she was busy, happily painting and drawing and cutting out cards as gifts for everyone in the house. On Christmas Eve, Mandy and Jonathan made paper chains to hang in the library where the Christmas tree was going to be. And in the early evening, after dinner, Mandy was allowed downstairs to help the family with the rest of the decorations. Bill and Brendan had brought in a huge fir tree that they had cut down on the estate. It nearly touched the ceiling. Bill stood on a ladder, and the children passed up to him the tinsel and lights and ornaments. At the appropriate time, Bill signaled for everyone to stand back, and he turned off the overhead lights. Then he touched a separate switch, and the Christmas tree suddenly burst into life. Glowing and twinkling in the darkened room, it shone like a fairy tale tree. The silver and gold ornaments reflected color from the lights, and toy soldiers and gingerbread men and dancing ladies spun lazily from the branches. The tinsel angel at the very top of the tree seemed to be smiling down on everyone. They all applauded loudly. Samson served mulled wine for the grown-ups and hot chocolate for the children, and then they all sat by the fire in the darkened room and roasted marshmallows and told Christmas stories. Mandy felt suffused with happiness. She wondered what all the children at the orphanage were doing, and remembered her other Christmases there. It was a surprise to discover that feeling this good was actually a painful experience. She shut out her memories and tried to concentrate on this most wonderful time. Christmas morning was noisy and cheerful. Mandy and Jonathan received stockings filled with all manner of small presents and sweets and fruit. Jonathan had a toy bugle in his stocking, which he insisted on blowing outside Mandy's room at a terribly early hour. He made so much noise that she laughingly hid beneath the covers until he stopped. The day swung joyously from one happy moment to another. Presents were distributed to everyone. Mandy had never received such lovely gifts. Bill and Anne gave her a beautiful red dress. It had an old-fashioned white lace collar and frilly lace cuffs, and there was a pair of red shoes with silver buckles on them to go with the dress. They also gave her a tiny gold signet ring with her initials carved on it, and miraculously it fit her third finger perfectly. Mandy vowed to herself that she would never, ever take it off. Jonathan gave her a cuddly teddy bear made of something that was as soft as rabbit's fur. She received books to read and crayons to color with, and she thought that no other girl in the whole world could be so lucky. At lunchtime, a light meal was served in the small dining room, and Bill told so many silly stories that Mandy and Jonathan practically slid under the table with laughter. In the afternoon, everyone slept, and later Jonathan and Bill left the ladies and went out for a walk by themselves. In the early evening, everybody dressed up. Mandy wore her new red dress and shoes. Anne led them all to the big, formal dining room. She flung open the double doors, and everyone cried out with delight. The room was completely illuminated by candlelight. Candles were everywhere, on the tables, on the mantelpiece, and on the small pedestal tables by the windows. It was a beautiful sight. Bill looked at his lovely wife and murmured, "I think you must have used up this month's and next month's allowance." Anne nodded happily. "I did, darling. But this is our first Christmas here, and I want us to remember it, always." He planted a kiss on her forehead. "I somehow think we will." The turkey dinner was delicious. Afterward, Anne played carols on the organ in the library, and they all sang until they were hoarse. Finally, at a very late hour, the wonderful day came to an end and everyone retired to bed. Long after Bill and Anne and Jonathan had said good night, Mandy lay in the darkness of her room, holding her new teddy bear close and reflecting how happy she had been the past few weeks. With a sudden shock, she realized that it was all going to be over tomorrow. Matron was coming for her at noon, and she was going to be taken back to her old life at the orphanage. It was an unbearable thought. She tried to tell herself it was selfish to feel this way after having had such a wonderful Christmas. She was so much luckier than the other children at the orphanage, but she wanted desperately for the happiness to go on. Why couldn't it go on? Why couldn't she stay here with Bill and Anne and Jonathan forever and ever? She remembered her conversation with Anne, and Anne telling her that they weren't sure they could afford to keep Cranton House. So, obviously, they couldn't afford to take care of one extra person as well. And even if they could, why would they want to? It seemed to Mandy that all the good things in life had to come to an end. It had been that way with the cottage, too. She came to a brave decision. No matter how sad she felt, she would not show her sadness to anyone. She would let Bill and Anne know that this had been the happiest time of her whole life. She would try to be strong. Having made the decision, Mandy wept. Matron called for Mandy at exactly 12 o'clock the following day. Mandy was packed and waiting for her, and she kept her resolve to be brave. It was the hardest thing she had ever tried to do. Jonathan and Bill and Anne walked outside with her to the car. Matron voiced for Mandy some of the things she wanted to say to Bill and Anne. Thank you so much for having her. I know it's just been the most wonderful time, hasn't it, Mandy?" Mandy nodded. She forced her eyes wide apart so that the tears would not show. She gave Anne a brief, fierce hug and managed to whisper, "Thank you for everything." She stared at the ground as she offered Jonathan her hand. "Bye, Jonathan." "Bye, Mandy. Hope to see you soon." Bill looked lovingly at the girl standing in front of him in such obvious emotional pain. He placed his hands on her head and pulled her close to his side. Mandy buried her face in his coat. They stood that way for a long moment. "Come again soon, Mandy. Come and visit us often. We shall miss you a lot." Mandy could only nod her head. She tried to summon a smile and gave a small hiccup of emotion. Bill quietly handed her his handkerchief and then moved to open the car door. "Take care of her, matron. She's very special to us." Matron climbed into the car and Mandy followed. Her eyes were so full of tears that she could barely see. The car door slammed and the Fitzgerald family shouted their goodbyes. The limousine pulled away from the house, its tires crunching noisily on the gravel. Mandy did not look back. She sat stiffly on the edge of her seat and averted her head so that Matron could not see her. She gazed sadly out of the window. Matron was saying, "The children are terribly excited about your coming home, Mandy. You've no idea how much you were missed at Christmas." The car stopped at 2 big gates leading onto the main road. Mandy watched as the gates swung wide to let the car through. She felt as though she were a piece of baggage being shifted from one place to another. She had a sudden desire to jump out of the car and run far away from everyone. How wonderful it would be to live her own life, to be free to decide things for herself. The orphanage seemed smaller than Mandy remembered. It looked bleak and grey. The only cheerful thing about it was the welcome of the children who came rushing out as the car pulled up to the front door. They wanted to know every detail of her Christmas and her illness and her being away for so long. Mandy was achingly tired, and Matron suggested that she go upstairs for an afternoon rest. Sue carried Mandy's case up to the attic. Mandy gazed around the familiar attic room. It was so different from the large, airy bedroom at Cranton Hall. She wished she could be in that quiet, peaceful room at this very moment. She took from her case the brown teddy bear that Jonathan had given her and climbed into bed. "I've got masses to tell you," Sue said. "Will you show me your Christmas presents when you get up?" Mandy smiled and nodded wearily and fell into an exhausted sleep. To everyone's surprise, she didn't wake at dinner time. She slept through the night. Matron peeped in just as Mandy was waking up the next morning. When she saw that Mandy was stirring, she came into the room. "Good morning, Mandy. How do you feel today?" "Goodness, is it morning?" she said. Matron pulled open the curtains and came to sit on the edge of her bed. "It is, and it's 10 o'clock, believe it or not. Sue has been up and about for ages and is waiting for you to come downstairs." Mandy thought about Bill and Anne and tried to imagine how she would get through the day without seeing them. Matron noticed that Mandy's eyes were swollen from crying. "Mandy, Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald telephoned early this morning to find out how you were." "Oh, did they?" Mandy felt a warm feeling spreading through her. "What did they say?" "They sent their love and wanted you to call them later if you felt like it. Otherwise, they said they'd phone you again tonight." Mandy thought about this and wondered if she should return their call. She was sure she would cry. I don't think I'll call them just yet, she said evasively. I mean, I've only just come back, and I want to see everybody and catch up on things, you know. Matron seemed to understand, and she changed the subject. She leaned forward and gently brushed aside the hair on Mandy's forehead. Everything will seem all right again in time. You'll see. Later in the week, Matron Bridie rang the Fitzgeralds at Cranton Hall. She sounded a little troubled. Mandy's deliberately avoiding getting in touch with you. I really believe it's too painful for her. Anne's voice echoed her feelings. We miss her most terribly. She misses you too. She's really having a bad time of it, Matron said. She was questioning me the other day about her parents and how they died. That's something she hasn't done for a long time. How can we help? Anne asked. Should we come to visit her? I don't think there's anything you can do at the moment, Matron replied, except to keep trying to telephone Mandy. Even if she doesn't speak to you, it's important that she knows that you care. Anne related her conversation with Matron to Bill. He looked thoughtfully into the fire. It was a long time before he spoke. Damn it, I missed that little girl. Anne sat down beside him, and he put an arm around her shoulders. Well, at least she had a wonderful Christmas, darling, Anne said, trying to sound more cheerful than she felt. That'll be something good for her to remember always. I'm not sure if she isn't in more trouble because of her Christmas here, Bill said. Before she came to stay with us, she knew nothing of family warmth and love, and therefore she had no reason to miss it. But now... He didn't complete the sentence, but Anne knew what he meant. At the orphanage, the new year was ushered in quietly and with little ceremony. The children settled down after the festivities of Christmas and prepared themselves for the new school term ahead. For Mandy, nothing was the same, and it never would be again. She could not stop thinking, painful as it was, about Bill and Anne and Jonathan. She found herself reliving every moment of the time that she had spent with them. Had Jonathan found the other secret passageway? Had his snowman melted? She pictured the family sitting down to dinner at night. For the first time in her life, she was feeling homesick. She made a decision, born of great desperation. She spoke to Sue about it. Sue, promise not to tell anyone. I'm going to run away. Oh, Mandy! Sue was immediately concerned. Where will you go? I don't know yet, but I can't stay here any more. But why not? It's not such a bad place, and everybody likes you. I can't explain it, Sue. It's just something I feel inside. I can't spend the rest of my life here in the orphanage, she said wistfully. But what will you do for money? I have a little that I've saved, and I'll probably find a job. When will you go? I thought I'd try tomorrow morning, before anybody's up. I'll pack this evening and get a good night's sleep. But you're not to say anything, Sue. Do you promise? Sue was solemn and quiet for a moment, and then she nodded her head. I'll help you pack, she said. Later in the day, Sue came to Mandy, clutching a paper bag in her hand. Mandy, I want you to take this. It's some money that I was given for Christmas. It might help you a tiny bit. No, I really want you to have it, she said, as Mandy started to protest. She helped Mandy put her few precious possessions into a suitcase. Mandy packed her new red dress and shoes, and her teddy bear, and some trousers and sweaters and 2 pairs of pajamas. Then she pushed the case under her bed so that it would not be seen. "Oh, Mandy, I do wish you wouldn't do this." Sue was becoming increasingly anxious. "I understand how bad you feel, I really do. But what'll I do when you're gone? Do you suppose I should come with you?" Mandy thought how good it would be to have Sue's company when she travelled. But she shook her head and said, "No, this is something I've got to do myself." "Will I ever see you again? Will you write to me or anything?" Sue was tearful. "Well, I couldn't write to you just yet, silly, 'cause everybody would know where I was. But we'll see each other one day, I promise." The girls prepared for bed. They were both on edge and talked to each other in whispers long after the lights were out. Mandy looked up at the skylight over her head. It was a cloudy night and she could see no stars. She hoped that the weather would be fine by the morning. She was anxious about waking up early enough. Mandy decided that she would just catnap all night and not really go to sleep at all. Her mind drifted to thoughts of Shell Cottage, but she wasn't sure that she ever wanted to see it again. Anyway, it was up to Bill and Anne to take care of it now. She wondered if they'd be anxious about her after she'd gone. In spite of her resolve to stay awake, Mandy drifted into a light sleep. "Mandy! Mandy, wake up!" A voice was calling to her as if from a great distance. "Mandy!" Sue was standing beside her bed, shaking her vigorously. "Mandy! Oh, Mandy, please wake up. You'll never guess what's happened." What is it?" Mandy sat up anxiously. "I heard a car coming up the drive, so I got out of bed to look. No one ever comes to visit at this hour. But, Mandy, I think it's Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald. I'm sure it's their car down there." Mandy was out of bed so fast that for a moment she felt quite dizzy. She ran to the window and peered out into the darkness. She could see the shape of a car parked in the driveway below, but it was so dark that she couldn't tell if it belonged to Bill and Anne or not. Grabbing her dressing gown, she ran to the door of her room and opened it. "Come on," she whispered. Sue eagerly followed her, and the girls tiptoed to the top of the main stairway. The house was very dark, except for a small light in the hall. Mandy crept farther down the stairs and leaned over the banister. She could see a beam of light coming from under the door in Matron's study, and she could hear voices, soft and indistinct. "Can you hear what they're saying?" Sue asked. "No, I can't." "Do you suppose it's them?" "Shh." Mandy was trembling. Suddenly, before the girls could run away, the study door was flung wide open, and Matron came out. She turned on the main hall light, and both girls were left standing in the bright glare. Matron blinked in surprise at the sight of them both. Then, instead of being angry, she gave a slight smile and said in a very ordinary voice, "Oh, Mandy, I'm glad you're up. I was just coming to wake you. There's someone down here to see you." "Good evening, Manders," said Bill. Mandy's heart did a huge somersault. "Hello, darling," Anne said. Both the Fitzgeralds were smiling. Mandy had such an urgent desire to run to them that she thought she would fall and tumble down the stairs in her excitement, but she contained herself and stayed where she was. "Hello," she said, and was surprised at how flat and non-committal her voice sounded. "Well, Mandy, aren't you coming down?" Matron moved to the staircase. "Why don't you come and visit for a while, and I'll take Sue back to her room and keep her company." Mandy walked slowly down the stairs, gripping the banister tightly, feeling that her legs would buckle beneath her unless she did. "How have you been, Mandy?" Bill asked warmly. "Oh, fine." Again her voice sounded remote and disinterested. The three of them moved into the study. "Mandy, you can't imagine how badly we've missed you," Anne was saying. Mandy sat down in a chair by the fire and folded her hands together tightly in an effort to stop them from trembling. Has everything been all right since you've been back?" Anne asked. Mandy nodded. "Did you miss us?" Bill smiled his teasing smile. "Yes, I did," she said in a small voice, thinking, "What is the matter with me? Why am I behaving so strangely?" Bill sat down and leaned toward her. "Manders, we came especially to see you tonight because we have something to tell you. After you left us, we discovered that we missed you terribly. It just wasn't the same in the house without you. Even poor old Jonathan seems lost and out of sorts. We decided that we would ask Matron if it would be possible for you to come and live with us." Mandy's eyes widened as she drew in a deep breath. "We wanted to come and speak to you about it right away," Bill went on. "But first of all, it was necessary to find out from the authorities whether they would let us adopt you. They took forever to find your records. But, darling, just tonight we finally got permission to come and speak to you. We couldn't wait until the morning, so we came over right away." Anne moved forward and spoke in a warm and loving voice. "Darling, we do love you very much. We've always wanted a little girl, and you seemed so special to us from the very first night you came to the house. You don't have to make up your mind about this just yet, but do you think you could consider coming to live with us for always? I think we could make you very happy. How do you feel about taking us on as a family?" There was a moment of silence. The only sound in the little study was the loud ticking of the clock. Mandy found that she was completely and utterly speechless. To be adopted, to live in Cranton Hall forever, to be with this family that she had come to adore so much, not to have to live at the orphanage for the rest of her life, or run away as she had planned to do. "We love you very much, Mandy. We think we could make you very happy. We've always wanted a little girl." Suddenly, Mandy was filled with the most enormous, brimming happiness. She rose unsteadily to her feet and looked first at Bill and then at Anne. "Oh, gosh," was all she could say. "Oh, gosh." Bill began to laugh. Anne held out her arms, and Mandy went into them and clung tightly. She had never been so happy in her whole life, and she could not stop weeping. Anne bent to kiss the dark head, and found herself weeping too. The Fitzgeralds were anxious to take Mandy back to Cranton Hall with them that very evening, but Mandy decided she would prefer to wait until the following day. She knew that she could not say goodbye to Sue so abruptly and leave her to spend the rest of the night alone. So it was decided that Bill would call for Mandy in the morning. The Fitzgeralds bid her a fond good night, and afterward Mandy broke the wonderful news to her friend. "Oh, Mandy, you are lucky. What a fabulous thing to happen. I know you'll be very happy." Quite suddenly, Sue burst into tears. Mandy put her arms around her. "Oh, Sue, don't cry. Please don't. We'll be able to see lots and lots of each other. You can come to the house and play and maybe spend the night sometimes." Sue nodded and rubbed her eyes. "I'm really terribly thrilled. It's just that I'll miss you so badly." She blew her nose hard. "I'll miss you too." The girls clung to each other for a moment. Sue looked up and said, "Golly, how lucky it was that they came to see you tonight. You'd have been gone by tomorrow." The next day, Mandy could hardly wait for Bill to come and pick her up. She had the terrible fear that he might change his mind. Her packing was done in no time at all, since she'd been prepared to leave the night before anyway. When Bill finally drove up in his station wagon, every child in the orphanage was waiting to say goodbye. Mandy clambered into the front seat of the automobile and rolled down the window to wave to everyone. Matron was smiling happily and waving. Sue was smiling too, but her eyes were filled with tears. Mandy waved until the orphanage was completely out of sight. When she turned back in her seat, she discovered that she was crying. Bill looked across at her and smiled fondly. "A little sad?" he asked. "Yes." "And happy, too?" "Oh, yes." "A bit of both? Well, that's understandable." "It's silly, but I wish they could all come too. I just don't understand why it was me that got to be so lucky," she said. "Oh, Mandy." Bill looked thoughtful. "I suppose luck does have something to do with it. But you're a very special little girl, and I think you're strong and not afraid to go looking for your life." Mandy thought about that. Bill braked the car to a halt just outside the big gates to Cranton Hall. Mandy remembered passing through them a couple of weeks earlier and how unhappy she had been. The long driveway stretched ahead. Bill said, "You've never really seen Cranton, have you, Mandy? Come on, we've got time." He drove the car around the beautiful estate, pointing out the various places of interest. "There's the dairy, Mandy, and the courtyard beyond used to be the old kennels." There were hay barns and places for grain storage and silage and tractors and equipment. Mandy saw cows in the cowshed and a huge bull in an outside stall. There were chickens and cockerels, pigs and horses. A large, silly dog ran around in happy circles trying to scare the fowl. There was a big kitchen garden. Bill swung the wagon onto a wide, rutted track. A ribbon of water ran under a small humpback bridge, and beyond was the flat, smooth surface of a beautiful lake. "Bill, I suppose the little stream by the cottage runs into this lake, doesn't it?" "Yes, darling, it does." "Who used to live in Shell Cottage?" "Well, at first no one did. In the old days it was a sort of playhouse. My ancestors would have picnics there. It was a place to ride to shelter in when it rained, that sort of thing. That's why the shell room was built. It was purely a fun house. Then, of course, when times became difficult and the family was so hard up, it was rented out to whomever could afford it. Manders, what would you like to do with the cottage? It's yours now, you know. I thought I'd make a sign to that effect and put it on the gate, and I could paint it up a bit. Would you like to plant the garden again this year?" Mandy thought about it. She became suddenly serious. She remembered last summer and her passionate concern for the garden and the house. Would she want to spend some time at the cottage? Suddenly, she knew. "If I could do anything with Shell Cottage, what I'd really like to do is to let the other children at the orphanage have it." Bill looked surprised, but Mandy warmed to her subject. "You know, like Sue and everybody. They could come to it and play and have a part of the garden to make pretty. I think it would be marvelous for them to have a special place like that. It would mean having something of their very own, don't you see?" "I think it's a wonderful idea, Manders." Bill's voice was low with emotion. We'd have to build a gate in the big wall, but it could indeed be a playhouse for the children. He turned and smiled. Just as it used to be. That's a good thought, Mandy. I'll speak to Matron about it this evening. Now, darling, we'd better get back to the house. Anne'll be wondering what happened to us. I told her we'd be there for lunch. Mandy felt a thrill as Cranton Hall came into view. The station wagon drove around a circular lawn and came to a stop in front of the big house. Bill grinned at Mandy. "Well, Manders, you're home." Mandy stepped out of the car and raced up the steps to the front door where Jonathan and Anne were waiting for her. "Hello!" Mandy's voice was breathless with excitement. Anne folded her in her arms. Jonathan was grinning good-naturedly. "Hello, Mandy. Welcome home." Bill ran up the steps to join them, and as the family turned and walked through the front door, Mandy experienced a great, warm feeling of contentment. She realized that never again would she go through long nights of aching sadness. There would be no more depressions that she couldn't understand. At last she had a home and a family and people to love and be loved by. She had found what she had been looking for all her life. Copyright Dove Books on Tape, 1987.